A Hill Country lawmaker wants the state to better prepare for floods. Representative McLaughlin has filed a bill during the special legislative session that would require the Texas Division of Emergency Management, or TDEM, to create a flooding disaster guide, one he says the agency does not provide. KLTV's Michael Richardson has more on what McLaughlin and a Smith County official are saying about the legislation.
Representative McLaughlin of Uvalde says the state should provide recommendations to counties and cities on how to respond to flooding disasters.
This will help develop a guideline of what needs to be done, the preparedness that needs to be taken.
House Bill 108 would require the Texas Division of Emergency Management to create a guide that would be used by civic, volunteer, and community organizations. The guide would provide information on long-term recovery efforts and accessing assistance resources.
We need to have a coordinated response with this, where all the agencies and everybody's talking together. And TDEM is the agency that can do that, because anytime there's an emergency, who do we send? We send TDEM.
The bill comes following the Hill Country floods earlier this month that killed at least 136 people.
I think it's a good first step. I think there's a lot of things that still need to be done.
Smith County Emergency Management Coordinator Brandon Moore says the bill is a step in the right direction, but that it would not significantly impact Smith County due to low population near the rivers. He says the focus should be on providing funding to local officials.
We don't have to wait days to get assets in or anything. I mean, we're here as soon as something happens, we're going. I just personally think that starting local will better help locals.
Michael Richardson, KLTV 7 News.
The Texas Division of Emergency Management would be required to post a flooding disaster guide by April 1st of next year if this bill passes. The proposed law has not been assigned to a committee yet.